I would guess that for many of us, what we know about the book of Revelation comes at least as much from popular culture as it does from church. I won't ask for a show of hands, just think to yourself, what do I know? Where did I learn it? I am noticing some exceptions because there is denominational variation. We're coming from different denominational backgrounds. Revelation features heavily in popular culture. Not all of the parts of Revelation, necessarily, but certain images and phrases and themes have taken on a life of their own. The four horsemen of the apocalypse, for example, is an image from Revelation that has been repurposed, adapted in all manner of situations. You can encounter that phrase in fields from constitutional law to professional wrestling. Recently, the television series Good Omens, a fantasy comedy show based on the novel of the same title, it has a narrative about an angel and a demon trying to prevent the end of the world. It drew heavily on the book of Revelation, among other sources. Lots of biblical references and allusions and images, but also lots of things from other mythologies and other cultures. Meanwhile, Revelation is not an especially popular book to preach on or study in church, at least in our tradition. There are traditions where it's much more popular. But here in our Reformed tradition, we tend to give it a wide berth, wary not only because of its cryptic language and violent imagery, but also because of the detailed predictions of the end times, not in the book of Revelation itself, but that have flowed from this text in interpretations put forward by other Christian traditions, more conservative, fundamentalist Christian sects. We are not alone in our wariness. The great reformer Martin Luther once declared of Revelation, this is a quote, "Christ is neither taught nor known in it," although he did later change his mind. It might seem initially surprising that the book of Revelation is scheduled in our calendar of readings during the season of Easter. If we associate the book of Revelation primarily with images and themes like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the mark of the beast, the whore of Babylon, it seems like a strange choice for readings in this season of new life and hope and joy. But Revelation is a lot more than popular culture has made it out to be. Over the next few weeks, the lectionary includes some of, I would say, the best parts of Revelation. Key theological teachings that shape and ground the book, rather than the lurid imagery that you're more likely to have heard of that's captured the imagination of Hollywood. And if we listen to these texts with open hearts, we will find an Easter message of hope and new life. But let's take a step back and talk about the book of Revelation. And it's, trivia nerds are very specific about this. It is Revelation, no S. One Revelation, the book of Revelation. It was written around 95 CE, so about 60-ish years after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. And it was written by a man named John. We know because he says he notes his own name in the text. There have long been claims that the author of Revelation was the Apostle John, Jesus' apostle. And just as long as those claims have existed, they have been contested. I think it was the church father Irenaeus who said that it was the Apostle John who wrote it. There were some other church fathers. He was the biggest name that I knew. St. John Chrysostom said, no, he didn't. So this goes back to the earliest days of the church. Modern biblical scholars have come to a strong consensus that John, the author of Revelation, was not the Apostle John. First of all, he never claims to be in the text. So, even if you are a strict biblical literalist, you do not need to, which I don't think we mostly are here, you don't need to believe that it's the Apostle John. He never says he is. But also, the book of Revelation refers to Jesus and the apostles without any hint that the author is an apostle himself. So both because of the kinds of historical work that scholars do and because, it seems clear in the text itself, there's a lot of clarity and consensus that this is not by the Apostle John. There are 4 other books in the New Testament which are, along with Revelation, are called Johannine literature, which means by someone named John, literature of John. There's the Gospel according to John, and there are the 3 epistles of John, which we call very creatively John 1, John 2, and John 3. So we don't need to get into the question of whether those other 4 books all have the same author or different authors, and whether any of those people is the Apostle John. We're not talking about those today, but we know definitively that John of Patmos, who we call John of Patmos because he says he's in Patmos, who wrote Revelation, did not write any of the other Johannine literature. So, Gospel of John, Epistles of John, set it to the side. Revelation is by a guy named John who was not the apostle and didn't write the other John stuff. Another thing to keep in mind as we explore this text is that although Revelation is the only work of apocalyptic literature in the New Testament, there are apocalyptic passages in certain other parts, but no other work of apocalyptic literature as like a genre. Revelation is not in any way the only work of apocalyptic literature, full stop. It's just the only one in the New Testament. It is part of a genre which was common and was widely known in the time period when it was written, and it follows the conventions of that genre. The word, the genre of apocalyptic literature comes out of largely the Jewish community in the post-exilic years. So after they come back from exile in Babylon, that's when this genre emerges. And it's used in the Jewish community and then also adopted in the Christian community as Christianity takes shape. And Revelation is the one that makes it into the Bible, but it is not the only example of this kind of literature. The word apocalypse comes from the roots apa, which we transliterate as APO. It's a prefix, and it means away from or off of, and kalypto, which means cover. So apocalypse means something like to uncover, or to reveal, or to unveil. Interestingly, that kalypto, it's also the root word for eucalyptus. Now you know. So the idea of apocalyptic literature was to give a vision of the true nature of the world, to uncover or unveil reality. And the conventions of apocalyptic literature included speaking of a messenger from God, often an angel, but not always, giving the author a vision of the end times or the end of the age, and that vision would serve to unveil a reality of how the world really is that was different from the way things are now. With those things in mind, which we'll keep coming back to as we look at passages from Revelation over the coming weeks, we turn to today's passage. It's from the first part of the book of Revelation. And perhaps you noticed, as Kramer read it, that this writing is an epistle. It's a letter. And that actually isn't completely conventional for apocalyptic literature. John addresses his account of his vision to what he calls the 7 churches that are in Asia, which he later lists out and addresses these churches individually. They're all in what is now Turkey, like the Asian part of Turkey, the European part is like, Turkey's mostly in Asia, right? The region of Anatolia. And this region was part of the Roman Empire, as were all Christian churches at that time. And several of these churches in Asia, in Anatolia, were undergoing persecution at the hands of the Roman authorities. He greets these churches in the name of Jesus, and this is where I think we start to hear the strains of Easter hope. From Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, and ruler of the kings of the earth. John refers to Jesus with 3 titles, 3 descriptors. Jesus is the faithful witness. That's legal language. It was adopted as religious language, but it began as legal language, like a witness in court. And it would come to mean someone testifying to their faith. John is proclaiming that Jesus is someone who told the truth, who could be believed, whose teachings were reliable. And then John calls Jesus firstborn of the dead. That is to say that he proclaims the good news of Easter, that Jesus died and that Jesus rose. He rose from the dead. But that's not all. When he says that Jesus is the firstborn of the dead, he is saying that Jesus' resurrection was not an isolated, miraculous event, but a vanquishing of death for all, for the whole human family, for all of creation. Jesus is the firstborn of the dead. That promises that resurrection is for all of us, that death is not the end of our story. And then John names Jesus as ruler of the kings of the earth. In the midst of persecution, writing from a remote island where John was said to have been exiled because of his faith, that's the most likely reason that somebody would be in Patmos, writing to churches that were under persecution by representatives of the emperor, John declares that Jesus is ruler of the kings of the earth. It may look on the surface like Caesar has ultimate authority. Authority to persecute, authority to torture, authority to kill, authority to exile. But in his revelation, in his uncovering, John's very opening words say that the truth to be unveiled is that Jesus Christ is the King of kings, ruler of the kings of the earth, whether the kings of the earth know it or not. Lauren Winner, in her commentary on this passage, writes about looking out at her congregation on Easter morning and knowing the burdens and cares and private heartbreaks of the people gathered there. She writes about looking out at the congregation and knowing that this one is fighting cancer, and that one has an adult child whose life is falling apart, and that one is in the midst of a profound crisis of faith. Looking out at her congregation and seeing that they have all come with their burdens in all earnestness and hope, to raise their alleluias, to sing praises regardless. And she says that is what John of Patmos is doing. From the island of his exile, writing to churches that are in the midst of peril and uncertainty, they and we are raising up Easter cries of Alleluia, a proclamation that no matter what it may look like, this world is not held in the brutal and merciless fist of Caesar, but in the serving and sacrificing hands of Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, firstborn of the dead, and ruler of the kings of the earth. So friends, in this Easter season, may our ears hear the Alleluias that have rung forth from people like us around the world and through the centuries. They sang their certainty that tyrants would fall, that unjust rulers would be put down from their thrones, that love would reign, that oppression and injustice would pass away, that death would be conquered, that tears would be turned into laughter and mourning into joy. That when the way the world really is unveiled, we will see the way of Jesus, the faithful witness, firstborn of the dead, ruler of the kings of the earth, our servant leader, our Prince of Peace. May we find the faith to join in that song of hope. Amen.